Her silence cuts sharper than any scream. A man feels it first in the absence of sound, the way the room shifts when her voice is no longer present. He looks at his phone and wonders why it stays dark. He replays old messages, searching for warmth that no longer answers him. For him, her silence is not empty. It is full of questions, of shadows, of fear. And it is here in this void that his deepest insecurities awaken. Every man, no matter how strong he appears, hides beneath his armor a fragile thread of dependency. He fears not the sound of her anger, but the chill of her withdrawal. Anger at least keeps the game alive. Silence closes the arena entirely. What terrifies him is not rejection, but the image reflected back in her absence, the mirror that exposes his powerlessness. It is the oldest fear, as old as myth, to be left outside the gates, stripped of access to the feminine crown. Carl Jung knew this terror well. He wrote of the anima, the inner feminine every man projects outward. When a woman withdraws, she pulls that projection back into the shadows. Suddenly, he is forced to confront the emptiness he tried to fill with her presence. Her silence becomes a mirror, showing him what he does not wish to see. And the mirror never lies. You have seen this cycle before. He begged when you stopped answering. He grew louder when you turned quiet. He claimed indifference, then stalked the absence for signs of life, because silence is not neutral. Silence is a threat and a promise. A threat to the ego, which cannot bear invisibility. A promise of transformation if he is willing to face what the silence reveals. But most men are not. They scramble instead, desperate to restore noise, to erase the abyss her absence opened. This is the secret they rarely admit. Men are not afraid of losing her body, they are afraid of losing the reflection of themselves she once carried. When she steps back, he sees himself without adornment. And in that barren sight, shame rises. The shadow he kept buried crawls up from the depths. It whispers of inadequacy, abandonment, betrayal. He calls her cold, heartless, manipulative. But in truth, her silence simply echoes what already lived in him. Silence is not weakness. It is the most refined weapon of feminine sovereignty. It does not chase, it does not justify, it does not explain. It waits, still and unshaken, while the other flails. In the archetypal dance, her silence is the crown resting on her head, invisible yet undeniable. A man may storm, argue, plead, but he cannot touch what is beyond his reach. Sovereignty is not noise, it is command through restraint. But do not mistake silence for passivity. It is an active choice, a deliberate withdrawal of energy. Like the moon covering the sun in eclipse, her silence casts a shadow over the world of the man who once basked in her light. And in that darkness, the truth of his dependence is revealed. He can no longer feed on her constant availability. He must face the hunger he denied. That is why absence terrifies him. And yet for the woman, this silence is not only a weapon, it is also a shield, a sanctuary. In choosing absence, she returns to herself. She reclaims the energy scattered in arguments, rescues the fragments of self lost in pleasing. She remembers that her worth does not live in his validation, but in her own still center. The labyrinth of silence leads her back to sovereignty. The question then is not what silence does to him, but what it awakens in you. Can you withstand the temptation to break it? Can you sit in your own stillness, wearing the crown that cannot be seen but can always be felt? For silence is not just the end of noise, it is the beginning of power. And power in its purest form does not need to announce itself. He fears her silence because it reminds him of death, the death of his illusion, the death of control, the death of a version of himself that existed only in her gaze. What he cannot see is that silence also carries the seed of rebirth. But whether he steps into it or runs depends on whether she holds the silence long enough for the mirror to do its work. And so the crown gleams unseen, suspended above her in the quiet. The shadow lengthens across his world, and the question that burns is this: will he break under the silence, or will he finally face what it reveals? When silence enters the room, the ego begins its frantic performance. He rehearses old lines, tries on masks, makes promises he never intended to keep. Yet each gesture feels hollow, bouncing back from a wall that no longer responds. In Jungian terms, the ego resists the descent into shadow. It wants to maintain its illusion, its fragile narrative of being needed, admired, indispensable. But her silence denies him the stage. And without her applause, he feels the collapse of a role he cannot play alone. Men are trained to dominate through action, through noise, through force. Silence is foreign territory, one they cannot easily navigate. Noise can be contested, silence cannot. A sword may meet another sword, but what does a sword do when faced with air? This is why absence is unbearable. It strips him of the tools he understands. He cannot argue with quiet. He cannot seduce it, bribe it, or bully it. He must either retreat into himself or lash out in desperation. And often he chooses the latter. But you see, this desperation is not power, it is exposure. His fear of abandonment reveals itself in every frantic message, every uninvited visit, every attempt to provoke a reaction. What he believes is control is merely the shadow of his own dependency. The more he resists the silence, the louder his shadow speaks. The mirror grows sharper, reflecting back the boy within the man, the one who once felt unseen, unwanted, cast aside. Your silence summons him to the surface. And here lies the paradox. Though he may fear the silence, he also becomes addicted to it. Like a moth circling a flame, he cannot resist returning to the void that unsettles him. The absence is unbearable, yet it pulls him back again and again. Because in that silence lives the possibility of redemption. If only she would speak, he imagines, the torment would end. But when she does not, the torment deepens, turning desire into obsession. You, on the other hand, must learn to see this obsession not as a threat but as proof of your sovereignty. For obsession is not love. It is the ego's desperate attempt to regain control over the lost projection. Your silence fractures the illusion that he holds the crown. He begins to sense that it rests elsewhere on your head, steady and unseen. This realization destabilizes him, but it strengthens you if you can hold steady. Still, silence is not without its trials for the woman. The temptation to break it comes like a whisper in the night. You feel the pull to explain, to reassure, to answer. Because silence is not only difficult for him, it is difficult for you. It demands faith in your own worth, a willingness to be misunderstood, a courage to walk through the labyrinth without holding his hand. The silence tests whether your sovereignty is authentic or only an act. And this is where many falter. They mistake silence for waiting, as if it were merely a pause before returning to the old cycle. But true silence is not waiting for him, it is returning to yourself. It is not the absence of speech, but the presence of self-command. In silence, you hear the whispers of your own depths, the truths drowned out by his demands. You find the shadow within you, the part that also feared abandonment, and you offer her the crown instead of casting her aside. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires facing the shadow, not avoiding it. When you hold silence, you are not punishing him. You are guiding both of you into confrontation with the shadows you each denied. He must face his fear of being invisible. You must face your fear of being alone. And in that crucible, transformation is possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. Silence is the alchemy that can either destroy or transmute, depending on who has the courage to remain inside it. Imagine it, a labyrinth lit only by flickering torches. He rushes through its halls, searching for your voice, for any sound that will tell him where you are. But you remain still, deep in the center, crown upon your head. You do not chase, you do not call out. You let him hear the echo of his own footsteps, the emptiness of his own panic. And in that echo, the truth reverberates. What he fears most is not losing you, but facing himself. Yet the deeper terror still waits, unspoken. For silence does not merely reflect who he is, it also hints at who you are becoming without him. And this possibility, more than abandonment, haunts him like a shadow he cannot outrun. The longer she remains silent, the more he begins to sense what has shifted. At first, he tells himself it is temporary, a passing storm, a test that will soon dissolve. But silence has its own gravity. It stretches time, turning hours into days, days into endless nights. He begins to realize that this absence is not a pause, it is a boundary. And boundaries are what the ego despises most because they reveal limits where it once believed there were none. Boundaries born of silence are not marked with walls or words. They are invisible, like a shadow drawn across the soul. He feels it when she does not respond, when her energy does not bend toward his need, when her crown no longer tilts to acknowledge him. He fears that she is not waiting at all. He fears that her silence is not an interlude but an emancipation. And the mind, when faced with such ambiguity, invents its own torment. This is where obsession deepens. He imagines her with another, laughing in some hidden corner of the world. He invents betrayals, suspects secrets, curses ghosts that do not exist. But the truth is simpler and more dangerous. E is not with another. She is with herself. And for the man who has built his identity on being her center, nothing is more threatening than the realization that she has become her own center instead. Silence is not absence. It is presence withdrawn. The presence she once poured into him is now turned inward, nourishing the parts of herself she once neglected. She sits in the labyrinth, hearing her own breath, touching the edges of her own shadow. The pain of silence does not vanish, it transforms. What once felt like abandonment now reveals itself as initiation. The woman who holds silence walks through fire, but she does not burn. She becomes flame. And here the Jungian truth emerges. What he sees in her silence is the projection of his anima collapsing. He once relied on her to embody what he could not integrate. Her warmth softened his hardness, her mystery gave depth to his surface, her nurturing soothed his wounds. But now she has withdrawn that projection. She no longer carries his inner feminine for him. He is left to meet her within himself, or else be devoured by the emptiness. Silence forces the confrontation he avoids. You can see it clearly if you dare. His anger, his accusations, his sudden promises to change, they are not strength. They are the tantrums of a shadow exposed. What he really asks is not, "Why are you silent?" but "Why won't you carry my anima anymore?" And the answer is simple, because sovereignty cannot be shared. The crown rests on one head and she has chosen to wear it. But here lies your trial. Silence is not simply a weapon against him. It is also a mirror for you. The labyrinth of quiet asks, are you silent because you are sovereign or because you are afraid? Do you withdraw in power or do you withdraw in avoidance? Only one leads to transformation. The other leads to a prison of your own making. For silence, like shadow, has two faces, one that liberates and one that traps. The strategy, then, is not merely to hold silence, but to hold it with awareness, to choose it not as retreat, but as reign, to let silence refine you, stripping away the compulsion to explain, the hunger to be validated, the reflex to be chosen. In silence, you choose yourself, and in that choice the crown gleams brighter, though no one else may see it. Meanwhile, he paces the labyrinth's corridors, haunted by echoes. He believes he is searching for her, but in truth, he is searching for himself. And the longer he wanders, the more the silence presses in. Each unanswered call is a stone wall rising higher. Each unreturned message is a door sealed shut. He cannot see the center, but he feels its pull. Something waits there in the quiet. Something he cannot name, yet cannot escape. The silence has become the labyrinth itself. And in its depths, one question remains unanswered. When he finally reaches the center, will he find her, or only the shadow of himself staring back through the mirror? The labyrinth grows darker the longer he searches. Each corridor feels the same, each echo mocking his effort. He is no longer sure whether he is chasing her or fleeing from himself. Silence does this. It erodes certainty, strips away the familiar landmarks, dissolves the maps the ego clings to. Without her voice, his world becomes shapeless. And yet, paradoxically, the silence is shaping him, though he resists the truth of it. A man believes power lies in conquest, in words sharpened into weapons, in actions that command attention. But silence disarms these tools. It is the battlefield where noise collapses, where strategies fail. When she withholds response, he can no longer define himself through opposition. He is left to face the hollow echo of his own performance. This is not cruelty, it is revelation. Silence unmasks the actor, leaving only the raw face beneath. And it is here that the deepest shadow emerges, his fear of insignificance. To be ignored is, for him, worse than to be hated. Hatred at least acknowledges his existence, but silence erases him from her stage, dissolves him from her world. Jung would call this the annihilation of persona, the mask stripped from the face, leaving the trembling archetype beneath. Her absence does not destroy him. It simply refuses to sustain the illusion that he was ever her center. You see, silence is not empty space. It is a mirror so polished it reflects without distortion. What he sees in it terrifies him. The cracks he tried to cover, the boy inside the man, the hunger he never admitted. And though he may rage against the mirror, though he may call her cold or cruel, he knows the truth. Her silence has not created his wounds. It has only revealed them. But let us turn the mirror toward you. For silence is not merely what he suffers, it is what you must inhabit. And inhabiting silence requires its own kind of courage. It means resisting the temptation to fill the void with explanation. It means refusing to rescue him from his reflection. It means accepting that he may never understand, may never change, may never return. Silence is sovereignty because it accepts reality without bargaining. This is the heart of feminine dominance, the refusal to collapse into noise just to soothe his ego, the willingness to let absence speak louder than presence, the power to remain still when every nerve begs you to answer. Sovereignty is not in punishing him. Sovereignty is in mastering yourself. When you can hold silence without trembling, you hold the crown. And yet silence is not meant to last forever. Like night, it is a cycle. It prepares, cleanses, reorients. For the woman, silence is not exile but initiation. It is the descent into her own depths, the confrontation with her own shadow. She discovers the parts of herself that once needed to be needed. She sees how often she spoke not to express but to keep him close. And in that recognition, she takes back her power. She learns that her voice is most potent when it is not compelled by fear. Imagine her now seated at the center of the labyrinth. Around her, the walls shift and echo with his footsteps, but she does not rise. She waits not for him but for herself. In silence, she hears the whispers of her inner queen, the one who wears the crown without apology. The queen does not chase, does not beg, does not barter. She simply is, and her being radiates power, whether or not anyone else acknowledges it. This is what absence awakens, the archetype of the sovereign feminine. It is not about him at all. It is about her return to her own throne. The silence reveals where her loyalty truly belongs, not to his validation, but to her own wholeness. And when she finally speaks again, if she chooses to, her words will not be the cries of a wounded girl, but the declarations of a crowned woman. But what of him, wandering still in the labyrinth's maze? He fears that the silence is eternal, that he will never again hear her voice. He fears the mirror too much to face it, yet cannot stop circling it. He does not yet realize that the true terror is not losing her. It is discovering that she no longer needs to be found. And in that moment of dawning awareness, the silence deepens. The labyrinth tightens. The crown gleams unseen, and the shadow whispers a question he cannot yet answer. The silence stretches into something larger than time. It is no longer measured in hours or days, but in shifts of energy, in the weight of unspoken truths pressing against the air. He feels it like gravity pulling him down, a force he cannot resist. The more he struggles, the heavier it becomes until he begins to understand. Silence is not absence, it is judgment. Not a judgment spoken aloud, but the unflinching judgment of reality itself. Every man carries within him the dread of irrelevance, to be forgotten, overlooked, unseen. This is the wound that silence exposes. When her voice vanishes, when her attention no longer crowns him, he is left naked in the arena of his own fears. He begins to notice details he once ignored, how much he depended on her laughter to feel alive, how often he reached for her presence to escape his own emptiness. The mirror does not lie, and silence is the purest mirror of all. In the mythic imagination, silence has always belonged to the feminine. It is the hush of the womb, the quiet of the moon, the stillness of the cave before rebirth. When a woman chooses silence, she aligns herself with these archetypal forces. She becomes more than an individual, she becomes an embodiment of mystery itself. And mystery terrifies the ego because the ego cannot control what it cannot define. He cannot name her silence, he cannot map it. He can only circle its perimeter, restless and undone. This is why silence feels both like threat and promise. A threat because it signifies the death of the old dynamic. A promise because it opens the possibility of transformation. But transformation is never guaranteed. The labyrinth can free or devour. It depends on whether he dares to meet the shadow that silence unveils. Most men turn back before they reach the center. They flee into distractions, into new faces, into noise that drowns the mirror. But the silence follows them because the shadow is not external, it is within. And here is the hidden power. The woman does not need to chase. She does not need to explain. She does not need to convince him to confront himself. Silence does the work for her. It strips away his defenses, dismantles his illusions, exposes his dependencies. Her only task is to hold the silence long enough for the mirror to burn through the veil. This is sovereignty in its rawest form, the refusal to abandon one's own throne for the sake of his comfort. Yet sovereignty is not cruelty. Silence is not chosen to torment him but to return her to herself. In silence, she gathers her fragments, calls back her energy, reclaims her depth. She walks through her own shadows, seeing the parts of her that once clung to high. Validation. She recognizes how she traded her crown for the illusion of safety, and with each moment of silence, she places the crown back upon her head. She does not speak it, but the air around her changes. The labyrinth no longer feels like a prison. It becomes a sanctuary. From his perspective, the silence now feels alive, almost sentient. It breathes, it waits, it judges. He senses that something beyond his reach is unfolding. He suspects she is becoming someone new, someone he cannot control, someone who may no longer need him at all. This suspicion terrifies him more than the silence itself. Because in truth, what men fear is not abandonment, it is evolution. They fear the moment she rises from silence crowned, no longer bound to the old game. And so he lingers in the labyrinth, torn between two impulses. One, to run, to escape the silence by finding noise elsewhere. Two, to stay, to endure the mirror until he faces what it reveals. Few men choose the second path, but those who do are transformed. Silence breaks them down, but it also rebuilds. It forces them into contact with their anima, with the feminine they disowned. And if they survive this descent, they emerge not weaker but whole. For the woman, this is not the goal. His transformation is not her responsibility. Her silence is not for him, it is for her. If he transforms, it is a byproduct. If he collapses, it is his lesson. Sovereignty means releasing control over his outcome. Silence is the crown's language, unyielding, impartial, absolute. Still, the labyrinth does not close its gates yet. Shadows move along the walls, mirrors multiply, silence deepens. Something waits at the center. Not destruction, not salvation, but revelation. And the question that hangs, heavy and unresolved, is this. When he finally reaches her throne, will he find a queen willing to be seen, or a silence that has already crowned her beyond his reach? The labyrinth tightens. Each turn he takes feels like a return to the same corridor, the same echo, the same silence pressing down. He cannot escape it, yet he cannot solve it. This is the essence of the trial. Silence is not a puzzle to be cracked, but a presence to be endured. And endurance is the one thing his ego resists most. Noise has always been his strategy, distraction his shield. But silence strips him of these. It leaves him face to face with what he has always feared, himself. The truth is merciless. He never feared her anger. Anger kept him alive in her world. He never feared her tears. Tears still bound him to her story. What he feared was what now surrounds him, nothing. No words to react to, no signals to interpret, no sound to assure him he still matters. Nothingness is not neutral. Nothingness is annihilation to the ego that survives on validation. Silence is the death of illusion. And yet, paradoxically, death is also the beginning of rebirth. Jung named it the Negrido, the black stage of alchemy where all that is false decays, making way for transformation. Her silence is this blackness. For him, it is suffocation. For her, it is initiation. The question is not whether silence kills, it always does. The question is whether it kills the illusion or the soul. From her vantage point, the labyrinth looks different. She no longer runs through corridors, she stands at the center. She does not chase the echoes, she lets them fade. The silence around her is not oppressive, it is sacred. Within it, she hears what she once silenced in herself, the voice of her shadow, the fragments of her truth. She listens to the parts of her that once begged for his validation. She hears the pain of the girl who once feared abandonment. And instead of pushing these voices away, she crowns them. She accepts them. She becomes whole. This is the true secret of feminine sovereignty, not the absence of shadow, but the integration of it. Her silence is not a mask. It is not a trick. It is a declaration that she no longer needs to outsource her power. She has faced the parts of herself that once bent to his noise. She has taken them back. She has made peace with her own solitude, and in doing so, she has transformed silence from emptiness into throne. Meanwhile, he stumbles. His shadow grows louder, whispering of betrayal, spinning fantasies of her indifference, inventing lovers who do not exist. He does not realize these are not visions of her at all. They are projections of his own insecurity. Silence reveals not her secrets, but his, and the more he fights it, the deeper into the labyrinth he falls. The labyrinth is merciless because it does not bend to desire. It offers no shortcuts, no explanations, no reassurances. It only reflects. Each mirror he passes shows the same truth, his dependency, his hunger, his unhealed wounds. He begins to hate the mirrors, to hate the silence, to hate her for holding it. But hatred, too, is a form of attachment. The silence shows him this. He cannot let go. For you, this is the strategy. Let the silence hold. Do not rush to explain, to soothe, to reassure. Do not shatter the mirror before it does its work. Sovereignty means trusting that the silence is enough. It means believing that what collapses under silence was never stable to begin with. It means allowing what is weak to die, so that what is true can live. And so the labyrinth remains, he circles, she reigns, shadows shift. The crown glows brighter, invisible but undeniable. Silence hums with its own rhythm like the pulse of something vast and eternal. But silence is not the end of the journey. It is the threshold. What lies beyond it is not yet visible. It waits, heavy with promise, dangerous with threat. And as he draws closer to the center, as the mirrors converge into one final reflection, the silence prepares to reveal its last secret, the one that will either break him entirely or force him to be reborn. At the heart of silence, the air feels different, denser, charged, as though the labyrinth itself is holding its breath, waiting for the revelation it was built to deliver. He does not realize that every step he has taken was never toward her, but toward the truth buried inside him. Silence is not a punishment. It is an initiation, and initiations always demand a sacrifice. The sacrifice is illusion. The ego cannot carry its masks into the center. They fall away one by one until he is left with nothing but the raw weight of his own shadow. Here, his bravado crumbles. His arguments seem childish. His threats sound hollow. Even his longing, once so commanding, feels frail against the abyss. Silence does not bargain with performance. It waits for the truth beneath it. And the truth is this: he fears not her loss, but his own emptiness. He craves not her love, but the escape she once provided from his solitude. Silence exposes the parasite within, the way he fed on her attention, her energy, her presence to fill his void. He did not want her as she truly was. He wanted the reflection she gave him, and now, in silence, that reflection has vanished. He sees nothing but himself, and it terrifies him. For her, the silence has already done its work. She is not waiting for him. She is listening to herself. She hears the rhythm of her own breath, steady and sovereign. She feels the weight of the crown upon her head, not heavy but grounding. She no longer fears being unseen because she sees herself clearly now. What once felt like exile has become empire. The labyrinth that trapped him has become her throne room. This is the final reversal. Silence is his prison but her liberation. What suffocates him nourishes her. What he calls cruelty, she calls clarity. She no longer mistakes his need for her worth. She no longer confuses his noise with intimacy. She has reclaimed the mirror, and in it she sees herself whole. The shadow she once ran from now stands beside her, crowned as ally rather than enemy. Integration is complete. But silence is not endless. It is not meant to be a tomb. It is a passage, and from this passage choice emerges. For her, the choice is whether to speak again, and if so, from what place, from fear or from sovereignty, from longing or from command, from the wounded girl or from the crowned queen. This choice cannot be rushed. Silence ensures it is made from truth, not reaction. And for him, the choice is whether to meet the mirror or flee from it. Some collapse under the weight of absence, unable to face the emptiness inside. Others, rare and scarred, allow silence to break them open. They surrender their illusions, confront their shadows, and emerge different. Not entitled but humble, not dominant but whole. These men do not beg the queen to step off her throne. They approach her as she is, crown intact, silence intact. And in doing so, they prove themselves worthy of presence again. This is the hidden promise inside the threat. Silence can annihilate illusions, but it can also forge truth. It can break the boy and summon the man. It can dissolve false bonds and birth authentic ones. But this promise is only fulfilled if both endure the silence without fleeing. Few men are willing. Fewer women are steady enough to hold the silence without breaking. Those who do are transformed forever. Now the labyrinth trembles. The mirrors converge. The silence thickens to its peak. Something vast and final presses against the walls. She feels it in her bones, the threshold between silence and voice, between absence and presence, between shadow and integration. He feels it too, though he does not yet understand it. The crown gleams brighter. The mirror clears. The silence prepares to speak in a language older than words. And what it reveals will determine everything. The silence breaks not with sound, but with realization. In the center of the labyrinth, there is no voice, no scream, no whispered explanation. There is only truth, unveiled like a mirror finally cleared of fog. He sees himself, unadorned, unprotected, undeniable, and she sees herself, sovereign, whole, radiant in the crown that was always hers. The silence has done its work. For him, the revelation is brutal. He realizes that all his noise, all his demands, all his fear of her absence were never about her. They were about the hollow space inside him, the unhealed wound he carried like a shadow. He thought he feared losing her. In truth, he feared meeting himself. And in silence, he finally has. Whether he accepts or rejects this truth is his choice, but the mirror cannot be unseen. For her, the revelation is liberation. She understands now that silence was never weakness, never cruelty, never retreat. It was the language of sovereignty. By choosing absence, she chose herself. By holding silence, she crowned herself. By enduring the temptation to break it, she proved that her power was not dependent on his response. The labyrinth was never meant to trap her. It was meant to refine her. And now, stepping from its center, she does not carry the crown as burden but as birthright. The strategies have been etched into her bones. First, silence is not reaction but choice. It is never about withholding to manipulate, it is about withdrawing to realign. Second, silence is not exile but sanctuary. It is the space where the sovereign feminine gathers her strength, integrates her shadow, and remembers her worth. Third, silence is not the end but the threshold. It clears the noise so that when she chooses to speak, her words carry the weight of a queen. The motifs are transformed now. The mirror, once cruel and exposing, has become sacred, a tool of clarity. The shadow, once feared, has been integrated, standing at her side as ally and guard. The crown, once invisible, gleams brighter, visible not to all eyes but to all energies. The labyrinth, once endless and suffocating, has become her throne room, the place where sovereignty was reborn. Silence, once weapon, now sanctuary. This is the final verdict. The woman who knows her worth does not beg for noise, she commands with silence. She does not chase validation, she withdraws into sovereignty. She does not fear absence, she turns absence into empire. And when she finally chooses to speak, it is not to plead but to decree. So the question passes now to you. Can you hold the silence long enough for the mirror to clear? Can you wear the crown without apology even when unseen? Can you face the shadow within you and offer it a throne instead of casting it aside? The labyrinth waits for no one. You are already inside it. The silence is already here. The choice is yours. Will you collapse into noise, or will you rise into sovereignty? Because in the end, silence is both threat and promise. A threat to the illusions that kept you bound. A promise of the power that was always yours. He may fear it, he may fight it, he may flee from it, but for you, silence is not something to fear. It is something to wield. It is the crown you carry, the throne you claim, the empire you embody. And so the story closes where it began, with silence. Not absence but presence withdrawn, not weakness but power refined, not exile but sovereignty restored. The crown gleams unseen yet undeniable. The labyrinth fades, leaving only the queen standing in stillness, radiant in her silence.